Welcome, Karen.
Thank you. Good to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Yes, we're so thrilled to have you record with us and for us to be able to share this with our community. And so, Karen, you're joining us from Alaska today. And we would first like to start off with just hearing about your journey of coming to the understanding of the principles, how that came about, and start there and see where that goes, if that works for you.
Yeah, well, I think like so many others, I've been a seeker for many, many years since the early 90s when I worked as a counselor at the time. And that's when I think that started my journey of learning about who I am, learning about codependency and everything I was reading and learning about. And so I've been exposed to many spiritual teachings, including my own from my own cultural background. And I came across the principles in about 8 years ago. And it was introduced to me through a Al-Anon sponsor of mine at the time. So Al-Anon is for families of alcoholics. And so my sponsor and I had been on this journey for quite a while, and she had also gone to many silent retreats and, the seeking part. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't talked to her in over a month, and she gave me a call, and her voice sounded so light, and there seemed to be no issues to talk about. And I'm like, what's going on with you? And she said, well, I came across a thing called the 3 principles, and I'll send you a link. And so I got the link and I listened to, it was Sydney Banks talking. Mm-hmm. And one of the first things, the main thing I heard from that talk was that we're already whole and complete inside. And in all my readings and learning, I had never heard that. It's like I have to keep working on myself. I need to practice. I'm not there yet. So I've been learning more and deepening over the years, and been to a number of trainings, and in an indirect way passing on this understanding through my work and through the camp I support in the summertime for teenagers, and through different various presentations.
That's wonderful. And what could you tell us more about the work that you do?
Yeah, my academic background is in cultural anthropology, and I've spent many years documenting, recording, listening to elders and other knowledgeable Indigenous people, in recording the deeper traditional knowledge of people who live close to the earth. And in Alaska, we still have many hunter-gatherer fisher communities, and it's part of what I practice, especially in the summertime, when what we call put up fish or salmon. So we go to fish camp and we spend a month there. And so recording that deeper knowledge, and the reason I feel I came to that work was because I felt something from that knowledge. There was something more there than what society offered me, what I was learning in school and what I was learning in college. I started college to get a degree in social work, and I ended up switching to cultural anthropology because I felt something more from what I was learning in one of the classes there. And so I believe that deeper understanding in me started with my close relationship with nature and being raised so close to the earth. There was no electricity. My dad had a dog team, and there were of course, no electronics like there is today. So it was a total different world. And today, what I realize is really that was the foundation of the core. The natural world points to who we are, really. And I felt that as a child. I think where I really got lost was the thinking part. You know,
Right.
we're all conditioned and taught to rely on our intellect, and the smarter we are, the more points we get, right? So yeah.
And do you see that the work that you do in terms of recording the wisdom of the elders, does the understanding of the principles, has that changed how you relate to that work? Because I'm just wondering what you see as the commonalities or differences around that.
Yes, I had gone about my work from a very vocal way, in a place of speaking up for how important Indigenous, the deeper traditional knowledge is. And at times I came at it from a very righteous place, also a very defensive place, and often angry place. Because in my view, and this is partly reality, there's the dominant culture that's at the forefront of managing and running so many of our systems. And so I felt I was coming from a place of speaking up, sometimes louder or to be heard. And it's always been important for me to see that Indigenous people who researchers or the other cultures is writing about, that they have a voice and a place at the table, that they have a say-so in what's written about them. And so the change with the understanding for me really came from softening that part of me to being at home for my own truth in what felt right to me, and not so much for my head of wanting things my way, and also that my way was the right way. And in some cases it was, but not in all cases, of course. And so the understanding has really opened my worldview, as far as, yes, I have an identity, what we might call an identity as a Native American person. That's a part of who I am. It's not all of who I am. And the presence and the freedom inside I've felt from recognizing that has been huge. It's opened my world, and in many ways it's also bridged relationship with people of all cultures, no matter what race you may be. And so that's the truth part. I feel that when I'm feeling, it's also opened my heart to more love inside. When I'm coming from a place of anger and righteousness, and it's got to be this way, there's no room for love or for compassion, or often kindness. And that's what this understanding has pointed me to. It's reconfirmed what I know, or what I knew. I think we all feel that part of us at times, but it's easy to gloss over at times also, as we get lost in the issues of today's world.
Yeah. And I think that what you're pointing to is so profound, and also so nuanced as well. So I'd love if we could just learn a little bit more about what you saw that allowed you to experience that expansive shift within yourself. Because as you're saying, there is the reality of racism, of Native American people not having a seat at the table. So it's not like that was all made up or imagined, and that there's often white leaders coming into Indigenous communities wanting to help, but not necessarily understanding how they're not respecting the culture and honoring the people with the best of intentions. And so we would both, I'm sure, right, Angus, love to hear more about how that shifted inside of yourself.
Yeah, I'm so curious, because I feel like this is something that's dear to my heart. And you look at the natural world. And by the way, Alaska is, still, I still haven't been to Alaska. It seems to be such a magical, wonderful part of the world. And it's so on my list of things to do one of these fine days. But to be an advocate for the elders and their wisdom, and that there is such a strong tide, it would seem, in the world that we live in today, which is kind of separating itself from what is essential, the natural world, and the wisdom that can be garnered from there. That how do you, and I know that you kind of already alluded to this, how one takes a stand for the elders and their wisdom when the tide is so big and so strong. And I'm so curious to know what you're going to say about, how, the principles and this understanding has kind of allowed you to see that looking at that through a lens of love in a very universal way is helpful. And yet there is this enormous tide that is so kind of lost in its separation from that wisdom. And I'm just so curious to learn more about what you see there, because that's something that I feel is such a growing edge for me.
Yeah, I'll start with the awareness I started to see, in me, and that feeling I had, and learning more about what the understanding points to in who we all are as human beings. And what I started to become more aware, more conscious of how I felt. And when I was in a meeting or speaking up from a place of defensiveness or anger, I didn't feel grounded. It didn't feel good. And this doesn't mean I still don't do that at times. Mm-hmm. I'm human, and sometimes that part of me still comes out. But I don't a lot of the time. And so my awareness started with how I felt. I started seeing and recognizing what anger did to me, how I felt in my body, how rigid I felt, how my heart felt closed, and comparing that to the softer part of me, and also, so that was the beginning of change for me. And it did not, this stuff doesn't always happen overnight. It does not happen overnight.
We know for ourselves.
Insight, but each time I saw myself and felt the anger or reaction, and it's that victim place of feeling like that small part of me coming into play. And each time I recognized that and was able to come back, I'm able to come back quicker. It doesn't mean, like I said, it doesn't, that part of me doesn't surface, the anger and that part, but I come back a lot quicker. And to me, that's my strength. If I also saw that when I was reacting a lot and being righteous and also trying to prove, I lose my grounding, and I don't feel as strong, and my strength does come from inside. And so that began my change in that awareness. It started with awareness. And as far as the deeper traditional knowledge and the documentation and recordings, I feel like I've gone through my own grieving journey as we lose more elders, because those were the elders, like even my parents' age, who are both gone now, who live closer to the earth than I did. And they were also fluent language speakers, which I'm not. And so a big part of documentation is also revitalization. Our language is nearly extinct because of, just because of our own conditioning in the English speaking world. And so there's, we're working hard to learn the language and for our younger generation to learn it. And language is, as you know, is a big part of cultures. So we are or it's a big part of who we are. There's certain parts of my language that English don't have words for. Like we speak of, like the creator, Sydney Banks wrote about this in the Missing Link book, about Native Americans calling the deeper part of us, the deeper intelligence, the Great Spirit. And just to point out, we don't, as Native Americans, we may not all call it the same. It may be different. In our language, we call that deeper essence of who we are Nakaltani, which means the breath of life. And so our language is more verb-based. It creates movement and versus more noun-based. And so the challenges I feel in today's world, when my mom passed over 3 years ago, I felt such a deep sense of loss, because she was one of my mentors, one of my main mentors. And one of the things I was pointed out by a mentor of mine was that I still carry that truth in me. Some of the seeds that was passed on to me from my mom and other elders, I can display, I can talk about, I can pass on, and I can live it also in my daily life. And so I think the important thing is, although there is loss with elders and that ancient knowledge through the current generation and us not living so close to the earth, we still remember really important parts of that. And it's so important to voice this, because we are not living and experiencing that life close to the earth. It's becoming more and more important to talk about it and to pass it on in that way. And it's similar to the understanding, the stories we tell, the metaphors we use to share what the understanding means. It's similar in that way.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and so hopeful as well. And I really appreciate what you're pointing to in terms of how we can respect the richness, the uniqueness, the wisdom that might be expressed differently in different cultures in different ways, and stand for that and be an activist for that, but from a place of grounding within ourselves, that the principles understanding isn't taking you away from what you believe in and what you stand for. But it sounds like from what you're saying that you found a way to do that feels even better for yourself. It's not about stepping down and not speaking up, but the way that you're going about it sounds like it's different, and that's more self-honoring for you.
Yeah, the understanding, I feel, has really strengthened my deeper knowing in that intuitive heart place that we feel, where where spirit arises from, really. And that I love how, that we say that the understanding is universal, because regardless of race or cultures, it's pointing to what we all intuitively feel inside. We feel the same in love, we feel the same in fear of loss, in death and mourning and grief. We feel the same in similar big ways, and that's universal in all of us. And I think we've gotten to a point over generations of us and them, far too much, to where the separation has gotten wider. And until we start talking about this and relaying what is real for us in our own cultures, because the way I experience my life in society is not the same as other cultures, mainstream culture. And some of my sharing is about, and passing on this understanding is about hope, and also that we are whole and complete, regardless of what's happened. And, if I was told this 10 years ago, I would have laughed at that and said, what are you talking about? Come on, man, this is history. This stuff really happened. And this stuff did happen. Traumatic stuff happened, and it is part of our history. But that doesn't define who I am. I am not the victim of that history that happened. And I also feel in that way, I'm honoring my ancestors who live close to the earth and who cared for the earth, generations ago. I'm honoring their deeper understanding of that spirit, and spirit comes through and can be shared through story in many forms. And that's one way, that the natural world is the mirror of who we are. And if we forget that, we lose ourselves, and that's when we stop caring for our earth, our home.
Yeah, it's again, for me, I mean, it is, if you look at, I guess the question that I have, and I'm just going to put this out there, is that if you look at how and look at your culture and how the earth is viewed as sacred, and yet there is the tide that I was referring to earlier, is this sort of this tide of separation, which is kind of sort of, I think that also ultimately shows up in a very sort of consumptive way. I think the way that I can maybe describe this is I had this incredible experience when I went to when I first met my good wife, and she invited me to Vancouver Island, and we went on this incredible trip to look at the first growth forest. And growing up in London, I had never found myself in an experience where I was right in the middle of nature and I couldn't hear fire alarms, or I couldn't hear, the noises, the noises of an urban environment. All I could hear was nature and the stillness of nature. And it was just so magical and so incredible. And I will never forget that to my dying day, but I also will never forget to my dying day coming out of that forest. And we didn't witness this going in, we witnessed it on the exit, driving through just thousands of acres of clear-cut devastation, which was just so troubling on so many levels. So I guess I'm so curious about how one can entertain and see that, mindset that is causing that devastation, that sort of consumptive sort of attitude that, you know, is so much a big part of the world that we live in today, and see that those people making those decisions still are whole and complete, that you know, that we are all one sort of spiritual family having this human experience. And yet, you know, to see and witness that devastation, boy, it would be difficult for me to sort of to see the universality of the individuals that are making those kind of decisions. It's just the world that we live in. It just feels like there is this huge tide that is so consumptive. But I love hearing what you're saying about the approach. It seems like that intuitively feels like the right way, but boy, that's a very strong tide that we're up against.
It is. And I had spoken to a college class last week, actually Friday, and I know one of the advocates who heads an organization in my region in Alaska, and they're speaking up to protect a land area in an area which potentially could be one of the largest open pit mines. And her question was, you know, how do you keep balance in your life? How do you maintain, you know, your sense of peace when we're faced with such big issues? And that's the big question, you know. But what came to me is maintaining my balance and my health and wellness and my sense of peace has to be priority. Otherwise, I'm not, you know, I'm working and I'm depleted. I'm working also from that source of, I'm facing an issue with the issue. If I'm just seeing the issue from a mindset of that issue, and I'm forgetting the source of who I am, that deeper source of light and intelligence that always got my back, no matter what, then I'm depleted. And I've been depleted many times, you know, trying by my will and my strong-headed stubbornness to make change, to create change. So I think it has to start with me and my well-being, in my inner sense of my own light and power. Otherwise, all I see is the issue. And then I'm on the merry-go-round again with the issue, and I'm trying to make change from the same storied issue, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It kind of makes me think of the Einstein quote, which you often hear in this community, you know, you can't solve a problem with, you know, the same level of consciousness that created it. And I think about that. This is something that Rahini and I have just been recently talking about in terms of how you can't sort of really meet judgment with judgment. So I feel like what you're saying is that, you know, you're looking to your well-being and using that as your anchor and core to sort of to not get caught up in the ferocity of judgment, which has to be so much a part of that experience, particularly when you're looking at this sort of very sort of consumptive attitude of, let's say, you know, the corporate world that is out there, and that's something that we all, you know, would want to feel like we hold so sacred and dear, but what we could learn from nature and that natural world and that natural environment. And yet what I hear you say is that, yeah, I look within and find that universal source of well-being, and let's start from there, rather than, I guess, you know, it would be so easy to go to one's position of judgment, that this is not okay. And perhaps that's where we might slip up.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the messages I heard from a mentor years ago, a Ojibwe Native American, said was that, we need to remember that we were all Indigenous at one time.
Mm.
And when I first heard that, I'm like, okay, what does that mean? But I know what she meant now.
Mm.
We as Native Americans still remember what our ancestors taught. We remember the stories. We still feel that intuitive, deep connection to nature. And from that, we have a relationship, as a strong relationship that comes from heart and spirit. It's not an intellectual thing. And so what she's pointing to is that, that there are other cultures who've not been connected to that source of place for generations back. And it's a matter of remembering, and I think that's the bridge of us as a human species, that it can't be us and them anymore. We're all in this together, where our earth is crying out for us humans to hear. And we need to come together as a strong collective and be the voice for our earth, and come back to the caretaking of our earth as our mother, as our home.
Yeah, that's such a powerful reminder that we are all Indigenous. We all come from the same source, but we may not all have the same connection, awareness, feeling for that. But that doesn't mean that it's not universal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you mentioned a camp. Did you say you work at a camp? Did you mention, or you go to a camp?
Yeah,
Can we come?
Man, I'd love to have you guys come. We support, actually, I'm from, Alaska is so spread out in rural communities, many small villages. And so the way you get to the villages is fly. There's no road or highway connection. And so in my home area, I work for the National Park Service, which is, part of my home area, where the park is. And I support through the park, in partnership with the local tribe, a camp for teens they're 12 to 18. And we just finished our 8th year of camp. And part of that is being out on the lake for a week, and we're learning. It's what we call as a leadership camp. So a big part of my vision is for these young people to connect with the leader in them, right? And so although we're learning some of the Indigenous ways, like medicinal plants or moose skin tanning, and how to read the weather without a radio telling you what. So we're teaching these different ways. We bring elders who also teach, the values, how to care for yourself and some of the deeper values. And so we have them out there for up to a week. And to me, I feel that's the easiest way to get back to who you are, is when you're in that deeper nature. Like Angus said, when it's more quiet out there and there's less distraction. And so the kids love it there. They're kayaking and they're hiking and they're fishing, and they're doing various activities, but we're also gathering as a community of support of each other. So although we have instructors who teach them, we also want to look to the kids to learn also. What are they passionate about and what lights them up?
Oh,
so we do this in June each year, and this partnership it's been key to developing projects like this or camps like this.
That's beautiful.
I love that idea of being able to read the weather without without the technology. You know, it kind of reminds me, I had a client once upon a time who was kind of a little bit rigid in their analytical thinking, and the conversation that we were having around the idea that there's an intelligence behind life was maybe proving a little bit difficult. But then when we started to talk about intuition, he had completely forgotten this, but he said that when he was in school at university, he decided to do a program. I can't remember the name of the program, but something to do with all things nautical and navigation. But then he had this teacher which kind of blew his mind, and spoke of how his culture, and this was in Hawaii, how they used to be able to navigate the seas, and there would be many times where they'd have to navigate the seas where there was, you know, there was no stars to see. It was just a very cloudy, stormy sky, and they didn't have, you know, a sextant or a compass, but they kind of used their intuition. And because he is a yachtsman himself, he says, like, I've had that experience a bunch of times. You know, I haven't had, you know, I haven't been able to see anything, and I've had to sort of like trust my intuition. So I think that I love the idea of like providing an environment where we can look to nature, because it must start to foster that sort of capacity with it that's within us all to trust that wisdom, to trust that intuition. I so love what you're doing. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and that kind of relates to the unknown we talk about, right? It's trusting the unknown. It does relate to that, because if I don't have a radio or a GPS and I'm on the land and need to travel by boat from here to there, and I'm wondering about wind, I'm going to look to certain mountains to see if there's a cloud over the mountain, which tells us that wind is coming, or a certain direction, you know, west, south directions. And if it's darker in those areas, that's, you know, you can predict storms coming. And so the unknown is a big part of navigation, I think, on the land, and trusting that deeper instinct. You know, it's similar to what the understanding points to. You know, so I thought I knew everything, right? And I realized how important not knowing is, because that's where truth comes in. That's kind of my main compass for going in the right direction, is being guided by the unknown and that deeper feeling the understanding points to.
Yeah, how lovely. It must foster you know, sense of presence and intuition. Rather, you know, we can get our phone out and look at an app and we're given the answer in a heartbeat. We haven't really been able to sort of foster that sort of moment where let's get quiet. What am I feeling here? What is my intuition telling me something? What are the nudges? Being present to our environment.
Yes, exactly. We just think, if you're out there and you're fearful, afraid, not sure, you know, the navigation and that sort of thing, and you're not present, it's the same thing of, you know, us being in today's life, right? If I'm full of fear of what's going to happen around the corner because of some issue, and I'm not present to that message, that deeper intuitive messaging, then I'm missing out on a lot.
Yeah. There's such a lot of, I was gonna say information, but knowing that we open to when we step into the unknown, the way that you're pointing to that, it's like it's in the unknown that we can hear and feel and recognize what we wouldn't see unless we settled into that place. And that's where we tap into the knowing that's beyond just the personal mind, right? And really have access to, like, how do they really navigate without any stars? But there's a deeper knowing that isn't coming from the personal mind. It's so profound, and what a gift that we, as these individual or perceived individuals, have access to that source within us, but it requires our willingness to listen and to move beyond our fears, move beyond the personal mind, and open to that which is greater. It's beautiful.
And that's such a beautiful metaphor.
Mhm.
You know, just this conversation now is navigating without stars or a compass,
Yeah.
and that unknown through, you know, I love that.
Yeah, I feel like certainly my programming and conditioning is to sort of I feel like has encouraged me to sort of really rely on maybe it's not I was going to say the smartphone inside my head, maybe a not so smartphone, but there's a part of me that just wants to click on an app, find something in my machinery that will solve this problem, some sort of something from the past, rather than look to this exact moment and be present to that. And where is my wisdom guiding me? But so much of my conditioning is like, yeah, you know what? Intuition is not even something that perhaps many people talk about in this day and age. I don't know. We certainly do. But it's so easy to default to the app inside my head. Is the answer there? Then it's not there. Then I get anxious. Well, I need to find another one. I need to download another one.
Yeah.
And you start Googling.
And then I get more and more sped up when really, and it may feel so counterintuitive just to sort of like, I need to settle, take a breath, slow down and listen and see what emerges.
Yeah, we forget we have our own inner app,
Yes.
right? And we look outside of us and think it's all out there. And
Yeah.
I think the elders have, you know, they're real concerned about the loss they see with the younger generation. And I did a project as part of this, like traveling on the land and weather reading and knowing, you know, when the ice is too thick or too thin in certain areas. And with the warmer climate, Alaska's weather has changed tremendously over the years. And so their concern is that the younger people are relying too much on the GPS or their phones or, you know, to hear the weather forecast. And that's not always accurate. And part of it in their concern is that intuitive map or app they're pointing to, right? That they know, and it's not always easy to put into words, this understanding and pointing to the deeper intelligence behind life. And so metaphors and story is a big part of that. And that's their way. And it's not always clear, right? But I've realized that it's not just a knowledge in the head intellect part, it's also that intuitive part of us as human beings that they're pointing to, the place that they traveled with, you know, being guided through their own inner act.
Yeah, it's powerful. And what you're pointing to just in this conversation, how that's all that's unfolding as we're listening to what the inner prompts are and asking the questions, you're responding. And isn't that a beautiful way to live life? That we can trust that and take the time to see what we see when we're genuinely listening in that way, in ways that can really amaze the intellect, because the intellect thinks it's not possible. You know, so often I'll text somebody and say, I was just thinking of you. But it's like there's something going on there that's beyond the intellect, where we feel and we know. And it's just amazing to recognize that there's such a richness that we can continue to dive into.
Yes.
And what gets revealed that gives us a greater sensitivity to others, to the planet, to ourselves, and allows for us to live in a more harmonious way, I would hope, by listening in that direction.
Yes, exactly. And it's so much more beautiful way.
Yeah.
I'm curious, is how would intuition translate? Would it be spirit? It would be considered along those lines. How does that translate?
I think part of it is the nakaltani, the breath of life. And there's another word we say, and it relates to the earth. It's kitniyi, And that means like when you're looking out at the earth, the natural world, it's speaking to us.
Mm.
And so to me, that's intuitive, you know, that the speaking to us or through us.
Yeah.
That's where the sensing, I think, comes in.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a recognition of the aliveness in all things.
Right. Yes.
And I love that there are no nouns, there are only verbs. I think that's defined along those lines. It's sort of, there's a fluidity to it that seems so aligned with, you know, how I would want to view that space anyway.
The expression of life force.
Expression of life force.
Yeah.
The movement of life. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Karen, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us that we might not have asked you or that feels important to you?
Well, I'd just say really how for me is coming across the understanding over 8 years ago have been for my life. And the journey, you know, over the past 8 years has been one of being more humble and more open. And also, it also means that it's pointed to certain cultural, spiritual related parts of the way I was raised. And the understanding doesn't mean, you know, I was over here and now I'm over here, but it's embracing every part of that intuitive feeling of who I am. And at times it means putting words to that. It means recognizing how important nature was and continues to be in my own culture, and how that directly does relate to the spirit of life, of all life, and that we are all as human species part of that. We're not separate. And so that's, yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah, that ability to see the connectedness and to realize we're really all in this together, you know, whether we see it or not. We're so, I think the interconnectedness of everything is becoming more and more apparent.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, we are nature.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Karen, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm going to pause the recording now and then we can sign off.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.